The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
Good morning. And it is with great honor that I stand here with you today. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you all for caring. And as David rightly says, we must care very, very much. Our friend and brother John last night was eloquent, and I thank you for your beautiful talk and your call to all of us to examine our spiritual responsibilities and to struggle with ourselves to decide which spiritual path we embrace. Because as David rightly says, we are in urgent times, urgent conditions, and our world and our country suffer greatly. First, I would like to thank David Bland and Betty Bland and the Theosophical Society for joining forces with me and being willing to carry this difficult but most important mission of restoring the truth to war. Many of you probably have heard the famous quote, first said by Aeschylus in ancient Greek times, that the first casualty of war is truth. We must return truth to war. We must tend that casualty. And the best way we can return truth to war is by tending our veterans and other survivors and restoring their voices and their souls that have been so brutally cut off from them and from us and from truth. So I thank the Theosophical Society and Quest Books and Sharon Dorr, Carolyn Bond, and Emily and Nicole and the entire Quest staff for joining forces together and taking up this cause. Many traditions the world over, because we have almost always had war, and almost all cultures of all times and places have had some sort of warfare, and more importantly, have had a warrior class of citizens. So there is much wisdom to be gained by studying and interacting with world traditions, past and present, in understanding how to help our veterans, how to understand war and warriorhood and its proper place and proportion in a society and in the cosmos. Because we don't do it right, because our war making and our war wounds are so severe, I have had to travel the entire world and study other cultures and traditions and participate in their traditions in order to figure out how to tend these wounds and how to help our veterans truly come home. Most traditions, not only in healing their warriors and bringing them home, but in all of their spiritual practices. Most traditions begin with spirit, and we must as well. So to begin my discussion with you this morning, I want to use the song of Sitting Bull. This is the song Sitting Bull wrote and offered his people when he became head chief of the United Lakota people. Sitting Bull said, "You tribes, behold me. The chiefs of old are gone. Myself, I shall take courage. You tribes, behold me. The chiefs of old are gone. Myself, I shall take courage. a simple song. We sang it again and again and again, and I want to pause and reflect on the meaning of each line. You tribes, behold me. The Lakota people were in danger. All of our indigenous people were in danger. They had never before elected a single head chief. They practiced local representative democracy. They didn't want one head chief over all the people, but they were under such attack and such danger that they needed to unify. And so Sitting Bull declared, behold me, I am willingly taking this office and willingly putting myself on the line to make a sacrifice for the sake of our people's safety and freedom. The chiefs of old are gone. Well, that refers to both the spiritual and the physical dimensions. On the physical dimension, the people were being slaughtered, and many of the chiefs and many of the warriors, as well as the women and the children, had been killed. And the people felt hard-pressed to find warriors and leaders and shamans to protect and preserve them. But on the spiritual level, it was true as well. The chiefs of old are gone, and that is true for us. We need our spiritual elders. We need our ancient spiritual traditions. And spiritual warriorhood stretches all the way back through history to time before time. All mythologies teach us the spiritual warrior tradition. They teach us that it is built into the nature of cosmos and psyche. But we have been cut off from that tradition, and we need to reclaim it. And Sitting Bull was declaring that too. The chiefs of old are gone. Let us reclaim the spiritual warrior tradition, and myself I shall take courage. There he was alone, needing to lead a profound and difficult campaign to preserve spirituality, freedom, safety for his people. And he stood up and willingly served. And he said, I will do my best to embody that ancient spiritual warrior tradition for my people. So we need to reclaim this message and practice it ourselves. So the medicine and the spiritual tradition comes first. And in the powwow tradition of the Native American people and other people around the world, after the medicine comes in, then the warriors come in. So I would like to invite, please, all of the veterans and survivors of war who are present in our circle today, please stand up and let us behold you and thank you for your service and your sacrifice. You tribes, this tribe, behold them. This, of course, sometimes activists and peace workers are offended. And if anyone feels that way today, I apologize. We also have wives and spouses and other survivors, and if we had enough time, we would share the wounds we all carry about war. Many of us are warriors of different kinds. And I honor you all for your service to spirituality and to society. But in particular, this morning, we are concerned with our warriors and our veterans and the wounds that you carry and the wisdom that you carry. And so we do need to recognize that when people, this issue transcends politics. And it's not about the politics of any particular war. It is certainly not about us agreeing with the making of war. But it is about honoring the warrior spirit and the warrior archetype and thanking and honoring those people who willingly put their lives on the line, on the front lines for all of us when we are in danger. And it is about restoring a proper relationship between our society and its warrior class. That relationship has been severely disordered, and we will talk about the dimensions of disorder as we go along this morning. But let's take a moment to honor the warrior in all of us. We have our veterans. We'll talk about the similarities and differences between the veteran status and the warrior status as we go along. But let me say at the outset that not only is warriorhood nearly a universal experience throughout human culture and times, but Warriorhood is, of course, an inner experience as well. Jungian psychology, archetypal psychology, recognizes 4 primary archetypes that we all carry within. There are variations between cultures, and there are many different forms in which the archetypes present. But archetypal psychology these days is working with the 4 principal archetypes: the warrior, the lover, the magician, and the king or queen. And these archetypes occur within us, in all of us, and they also are built into the nature of the universe. The cosmos seems organized to present us with these archetypes and to unfold them so that they guide us through our life cycle and in our service. Women have the warrior as well, though it emerges in different ways and during different times of the developmental cycle. What I would like you to do just for a few moments is close your eyes. And I'm going to use a few words. If some people may be uncomfortable with the term warrior because it contains the word war in it. So when you think of warrior, you might think of guardian, you might think of protector, or any other term that fits for you. But just take a moment to call forth your inner warrior, your inner guardian, your protector. Breathe deeply. Breathe into your heart. Breathe into your groin, your solar plexus. Open all of your chakras. Open your throat. Breathe up into your spirit eye. And ask your own inner guardian to come forth and show himself or herself to you. Let yourself see your warrior, your guardian, your protector. Let yourself feel and remember, know how, where, when this guardian has been called forth during your life cycle and your life struggles. And let your warrior, your guardian, make you aware of the service he or she has given to you during your life, and of the wounds that the guardian has taken in your service. And ask your inner warrior what he or she needs from you in order to continue to serve well and in order to achieve whatever healing is necessary. And exchange a promise or a vow with your inner warrior about how you will continue from here on to work and walk and serve together. Thank your warrior, your guardian. Bow to each other and gently bring yourself back to the room in our community. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Well, let us trust that the room is full of guardianship spirit and feel that we are in this cause together. So, show and tell item, our favorite reference for what's going on in American culture, USA Today. This issue was about 3 weeks old, and the headline reads, "Veteran stress cases up sharply. Mental illness is now number 2 injury." Now, if USA Today says it, it must be making its way into the culture. So, the important news here is that mainstream culture is recognizing and admitting how severe post-traumatic stress disorder is. And as David said, even the Veterans Administration now admits that 30 to 35% of our returning veterans have post-traumatic stress disorder. However, there are 2 mistakes in the headline. Mental illness is now number 2 injury. First mistake, post-traumatic stress disorder is not a mental illness. It is not. Korean War combat veteran shouted to me one day, "I'm not mentally ill, I was devastated by the world." We will talk about what post-traumatic stress disorder is, but from the outset, we declare it's not a mental illness. It is, among other things, the universal human response to severe, life-threatening, can't even use the word stress. Stress does not say what people in combat feel. We don't have words in English to express the emotion that a combatant feels. But post-traumatic stress disorder is the universal response. Every one of us will break down in this characteristic form under the proper life-threatening conditions. Second mistake in this headline is now number 2 injury. Of course, this article rightly talks about traumatic brain injury and all of the wounds taken by because of the IUDs, the explosive devices being used as the main weapon in the Middle East now. And statistically, that is the number 1 injury. But what is wrong with this headline is that in modern warfare, what we call PTSD is always the number 1 injury. You cannot go through the experience of modern combat and come out unchanged. You cannot go through the experience of modern combat and come out what we call sane. Ever since the Civil War, which is considered the first modern war, the number of psychological and psychiatric breakdowns has exceeded the numbers of killed and wounded in action. And this, there are many reasons for this. The devastation of modern technological warfare is so severe that there's only one personality type that can go through war and come out the same as they went in. And I'll bet you can guess who it is. Who knows? Who can go into modern combat and come out the same as they went in? Sociopaths, yes, of course. And why? No conscience, and they live from instinct, and war allows profound instinctual gratification of the lowest kind. So actually, psychopathic and sociopathic personalities often do well in the military because they have the severe discipline necessary to keep them under control most of the time, and they're given the combat experience that allows them full expression of their sociopathic tendencies. According to psychiatric research, sociopathic personality tendencies exist in about 2% of the American population. So that means that at least 98% of us will be severely changed for the worse by going through the combat experience. So the statistic of 30 to 35% PTSD is wrong and is way underplayed. Disabled American Veterans says that, as I'm saying, anybody who goes to war will come back with some degree of PTSD. It's not whether you have it, it's how severely you have it. Well, modern war has become so devastating. The technology is so advanced and brutal. It moves at such lightning speed that it is impossible for our emotions, our central nervous system, our brain, our bodies to process what's happening and respond and stay centered and stay well. We can't do it. Modern war has surpassed the human ability to tolerate. And so ancient uses of warfare as initiatory practice in order to mature boys into men no longer work. War has become anachronistic. However, we still try to use it this way. We are in an epidemic of war, and we have been for a long time. It's not just the modern American condition, though we're concerned about that, of course. There have been, in the last 5,600 years of recorded history, pretty much since we've been writing, there are 14,600 wars recorded. And these are only the wars with definitive outcomes, not the wars that drew to stalemate. So there have been 2 or 3 wars per year for the last 5,000 years. This is all over the planet, all people, all cultures that we know of. So we are in and have been practicing an epidemic of war for as long as we've been civilized, as long as we've been practicing urban cultures, as long as one person, one group has said, this land is mine, not yours, these resources are mine, not yours. And as long as we've been sedentary and established cities and defined ourselves as different from our neighbors. We are in an epidemic, and the planet is populated by the ghosts of war. There are many ways to understand post-traumatic stress disorder, many ways beyond the present psychological interpretation that it is a stress and anxiety disorder, and we'll talk about these for a while. First of all, post-traumatic stress disorder is a living death. A person is stuck in the underworld. A person is stuck in the war experience. PTSD is a frozen war consciousness. And those who carry this wound cannot rejoin us. The message that the war is over, you're safe at home now, just get on with life, is impossible for many of our veterans and war survivors to accept. And again, traditional cultures did not try to tell their returnees, just get on with life, you're safe now. They were very wise about how deep and pervasive the wound is and how to tend it. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. PTSD also is a condition in which we know the spirits of the dead are around us and with us. In our modern psychological interpretations, we pathologize people who have nightmares or who claim that they see spirits. Oh, this must be hallucinations. This must be psychopathology. But in fact, traditional cultures, past and present, all over the world, see the spirits of the dead. I just came back from Vietnam 3 days ago. Today's Saturday? I'm sorry. I'm really in a different time zone. On Monday, this past Monday, I was in Hanoi, attending a gathering of Vietnamese shamans and families of the missing in action. And the shamans were working with the families to channel the spirits of their dead, their missing in action. I could spend the whole hour talking about this, but let me briefly tell you that Vietnamese shamanism is a living tradition now, and that there are well over 10,000 recorded cases of Vietnamese shamans being entered and possessed by the souls of those who are missing in action, instructing the shamans on how to find the remains of the MIAs. And they're offering this service to us and to our MIA families. And we would be wise to accept it and enter into a unity with them. So the Vietnamese see the spirits of the dead and hear them. The people in the countryside talk about hearing them singing or crying at night in their anguish and asking for our help. In Korea as well, especially since the Korean War. There are gathering places where the spirits of the dead gather and they cry for justice to be restored and for the universal scales to be rebalanced. African and Native American people as well, of course, honor the life of the soul and know that when the soul is released from the body by violence, it wanders restlessly, needing help to return and find peace. European cultures as well are haunted by the spirits of the dead in somewhat of a different way. I spoke at a conference in June in Austria on memory and human war. There were people from 11 different European countries at this conference. Most of the therapists from the European countries reported that their countries, the people of their countries are severely depressed now because of the long-term transgenerational impact of World War II and the Cold War. The Austrian psychologists present were especially distressed because of Austrian complicity with the Nazis. Austrians felt that their country had been occupied against its will and then forced into complicity. And they told many horrific stories about how and why their parents and grandparents had been forced into cooperation with the Nazis. But my main point here is that the Austrian psychologists all diagnosed their entire country with massive pandemic depression and said that once they start treating individuals with depression, they find that it nearly always traces to the cultural sources. It's not an individual pathology. So there is depression in Europe, and there are apocalyptic dreams. People all over the planet are reporting apocalyptic dreams, seeing not their own wounds, but the apocalyptic dimensions of our contemporary experience, seeing and hearing and feeling the souls of the dead crying out to them, or our own collective souls screaming in terror at the conditions under which we're living. We all have PTSD. So PTSD nightmares, which psychology pathologizes and often tries to medicate, are not pathology, but rather they're the spirits trying to return to us and asking for help. And my dear friend and brother, Bob Cagle, could you raise your hand? I'm sorry, he just frowned because I'm picking on him. Talk to Bob about this. Bob and I have traveled to Vietnam together twice. Bob has seen the spirits. And Bob transformed his experiences of seeing the spirits from a disturbing pathological symptom into a spiritual opening to help the Vietnamese spirits and the spirits of our own veterans return and heal. Bob is a courageous spiritual warrior who has brought much healing for himself and American veterans and Vietnamese veterans, and he knows the spirits are alive and real and talks to them. So, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, as we said, it's not a stress and anxiety disorder. That is a civilian category. It's not what we feel when we're driving down the street in traffic and somebody rages at us. It's not what we feel when we are stressed out from all of the pressures of modern life. Post-traumatic stress disorder is something far beyond a civilian stress category. It's not an individual pathology or illness. When we make it an individual pathology, what we do is take our veteran or other survivor and put them off to the side as an isolated, categorized victim and patient who can be treated by the health and mental health professions. It's not a medical condition. Any of us can have it, all of us can have it, when we only treat the symptoms as if they were manifestations of a medical or psychological condition. We're only suppressing the symptoms so the rest of us can not be bothered and go along with business as usual. And it is certainly not healed by medications. Medications can control or suppress symptoms, and sometimes they're necessary and helpful to preserve life, but medications do not heal. And post-traumatic stress disorder, in its official categorization, again, as a stress and anxiety disorder, we are told that it is a chronic, lifelong condition we can only learn to manage. So the popular philosophy regarding PTSD and its treatment as a medical condition both tell us it can't be healed. Learn to live with it. If you remember your literature, the words written over the gates to hell are, "Abandon hope, all you who enter here." When we tell our veterans, "Abandon hope, you've got this condition for the rest of your life and you cannot come home and you will not heal," we're condemning our veterans to hell. And what is PTSD? Well, first of all, it's a soul wound, and all traditional cultures have recognized it as such. What is a soul wound? The word trauma comes directly from the ancient Greek. The word was trauma, and it means a puncture wound. A trauma was a wound taken from a spear or an arrow or sword, a sharp object. So when we are penetrated, we are traumatized. But the ancients were wiser than us in including the spiritual along with the physical. Trauma also meant, in the ancient language, a puncture wound to our souls, to our centers of being. So it isn't only the body that's pierced by an arrow, but it's a soul that's pierced by violence and aggression and wounded by the piercing, the penetrating. Trauma is a piercing and penetrating wound to every part of us. It goes to our core. When somebody tries to kill us, it's not just upsetting to the body, but it changes the universe for us immediately and completely. Likewise, when we're put in the position to have to kill another person, we have to overcome all of our civilized and civilizing traits, characteristics, commandments. We have to throw away the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." And when we do that, we are changed to the core. So PTSD is a soul wound. All of our functions ever attributed to the soul are transformed by PTSD, by the experience of war. How we think, how we conceptualize the universe and our place in it, how we feel, what feelings dominate us, whether we can allow ourselves to feel or not. Psychic numbness is one of the main symptoms, expressions of PTSD. Our aesthetics, our ability to feel and sense and appreciate beauty, what we consider beautiful or ugly, it changes. Our moral condition changes. We have been, we all wish to be agents of good and life and creation, but we may have experienced ourselves being agents of death and destruction and dissolution. And so our moral sensibility changes. It's turned completely around within us. We experience moral disorder. Our bodies change, our central nervous system changes, our ability to maintain intimate relationships change, our relationship to love and sexuality changes profoundly. Our ability, our trust, our connection to society, our experience of ourselves as a valuable member of society changes and can be damaged, perhaps destroyed. So every function that traditional cultures, peoples, philosophies have ever attributed to the soul are damaged and disordered under the impact of war and post-traumatic stress disorder. So it is a soul wound. PTSD is also the cry of the soul trapped in the underworld. PTSD is a frozen war consciousness. When a person has PTSD, they are seeing the world the way they saw it in the war zone. I would be seeing you in uniform, bloody, as potential enemies. I'd be more terrified than I am of standing up here before you if my PTSD was out of control and the wound was dominating me. So PTSD is someone trapped in hell in the underworld and unable to come back. So if we need to use the acronym PTSD, a better translation of it is post-terror soul distress. The soul is in utmost distress and screaming its pain through these symptoms. PTSD is also a social disorder. Whenever we go to war, our entire tribe is disordered. It is impossible to send some of our loved ones off to war while the rest of us are told to go shopping and live life as normal business as usual. It doesn't exist. It's impossible. Of course, we're all disturbed by the war, and pretending that we're not is part of our shared disorder. PTSD symptoms that we see in the individual are in fact epidemic in our society. Drug and alcohol abuse, marriage and intimacy problems, divorce rates, imprisonment, employment difficulties and instability, depression, severe anxiety, alienation from society, mistrust of authority. We can go down the entire list of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that we recognize in the individual and see that they are epidemic in our society. So if one of us has it, all of us has it. If one of us goes to war, we all are at war. And in fact, the people we send off to war, past and present, are only on the front lines for the rest of us. And when we are at war, we are in a condition of social dissolution. And war stretches from the front lines where our troops are taking the most severe danger and threat all the way back to us here on the rear lines. And we are all afflicted. It is a social wound. Among the Plains Indians of our continent, when the tribe was at war, they used to reverse the camp circles to show that the order of society was reversed. The hunters and warriors and medicine people used to camp in a well-organized manner to demonstrate the order of society and the order of the cosmos. And when they were at war, everybody would move to the other side. The medicine facing the east and the rising sun would be made to face the west and the setting sun and the coming darkness. The shamans in the north would move to the south to demonstrate to the people that everything is disordered now. The order of life is reversed. The order of the cosmos is reversed when we're at war. It's true of us and of all times, and we need to recognize this. In addition, PTSD is a disturbed warrior-civilian relationship. You veterans and warriors who are in our audience went to service for the rest of us. When we send people out to the front lines, it's meant to be for preservation and protection. A warrior's primary job and calling is not to destroy, not to cause death, but to preserve and protect the people they love, the country or tribe or community they love, and the values that we hold most high and most dear. When you go out to protect me, I am responsible for you. I'm responsible to help you and support you and help you survive the experience you're going through to the greatest degree possible. And upon your return, I am responsible for your wounds. I'm responsible to tend you. So when our warriors return, the tribal circle is supposed to open up and bring the warriors into the center of our love, the center of our concern and our resources and our tending, not pushed off to hospitals or vet centers hidden in the ghettos, the back streets where people don't even know they're there, not overcrowded, understaffed, non-responsive hospitals where our veterans continue to experience isolation and alienation. Veterans need to be brought into the center of our circles, into the center of our communities. And we need to reorganize our communities such that we become a veteran-friendly society and offer tending and love in the center, in our community centers and in our schools and in our houses of worship and everywhere. Again, we have a disturbed warrior-civilian relationship, and we need to restore it to its proper balance. And we who are civilians or who are recovering from PTSD need to be responsible for those who have suffered so greatly. And so, again, the acronym PTSD, if we need to use it, it's best understood as post-terror social disorder. We all have PTSD. We all feel global warming, and we know the Earth is expressing it. We can think of PTSD as the collective wound in all of our souls. Just as the Earth is screaming its pain through global warming, the human community is screaming its pain through PTSD. It's also, if we need to use psychological categories, it's best understood as an identity disorder. We are asking, in this conference, we are asking the question together, who am I and how do I fit into the order of the cosmos, the flux of the universe? Well, once a person has been off to war, their identity has been destroyed. And everyone needs to ask, who am I now? Who have I become as a result of my military and wartime experiences? This is true for all of our veterans because the process of becoming a soldier is a deconstruction of the civilian identity and a recreation of a military identity, and especially one who has been given the knowledge and skills in destruction and killing. And even if a veteran has never been in combat, he or she carries this new and transformed identity. And so we need to recognize the person is different, and we need to help them answer the question, who am I now? We need to recognize that the old self is gone, is dead. And it is necessary to birth a new self out of the transformation. PTSD is also incomplete and interrupted initiation. The old self has been destroyed, but a new self hasn't been brought to life. Remember the mythological phoenix, the bird that burns to death and then rises and is reborn out of its own ashes. PTSD is the ashes. The new bird hasn't been reborn. And incidentally, one of the 4 spirit animals of Vietnam is the phoenix. Vietnam has been attacked and occupied for 1,200 years, and it's risen and been reborn out of its own ashes again and again and again, and is presently coming back to life out of its ashes. We need, like the phoenix, to come back to life out of the ashes. PTSD is spiritual distress. One of our speakers at the Chicago conference recently, John Zemler, who was a veteran of the first Gulf War, said to our gathering, 10 years from now, when we all have post-traumatic stress disorder, I hope we will be worthy of the wound. It is the world soul crying its anguish, living under these intolerable conditions, not just of warfare in the Middle East, but of all of the social and environmental and political and historical ills we are all feeling. And so we all have PTSD. We are all responding to this anguish with these characteristic symptoms, and we need to recognize it and gather together in awareness of the universal conditions. Post-traumatic stress disorder is only our new, modern, quasi-scientific name for an ancient and universal condition. So we have to ask how we respond to it. If it's a soul wound and a social disorder, and truth has been damaged, and our veterans and other survivors are trapped in hell, what can we do? Is there hope? I wish I had hours just to tell you stories of healing. There are many stories of healing in my books, and there are 5 newly healed vets who just came back from Vietnam with me on Wednesday. They all went to Vietnam with severe expressions of the symptoms of PTSD, and they all came home, well, One of them said, what are these bubbles of joy that are coming up from the pit of my being? I've never felt them before in my life. They're sleeping like babies. Their nightmares are gone. They're joyous. Their guilt is washed clean. And perhaps as we go through the weekend together, I can share some of the specific stories. But let me assure you that it is possible with the right spiritual and social actions to bring healing to those afflicted with post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's quickly ask how. Since truth is the first casualty of war, and our veterans and other survivors are the carriers of truth, we must hear what they're saying to us and respond. I only am escaped alone to tell thee, the messenger in Job said. Our veterans are the ones who have escaped to tell us. We must hear, we must create opportunities for storytelling and truth-telling everywhere we can, as often as we can, everywhere in our culture. We must restore the silenced voices of our warriors in order to recover the truth of war. As a spiritual wound and a social disorder, the recipe for healing PTSD is actually simple. It's spirituality in community. Spiritual efforts can restore the soul, and community efforts give the soul a home to return to and address the wound on its social dimensions. It isn't just from the experience of war, but as David said about those veterans who have committed suicide. And the same thing is happening with our Iraq returnees. Suicide in astronomical proportions. The Army reports that last year it had more suicides and suicide attempts among active duty people than ever in its history. It's not just the war experience, but it's the military conditions people serve under, and it's the impossibility of coming home to a society that is as war-denying and truth-denying as ours that cause PTSD. So we need to reorder our society, not our veterans, our society in a way that enables our veterans to come home. Now, an identity disorder can be addressed through identity transformation. We have to help our veterans discover meaning from their experience. We have to bless the wound rather than hide it. Native American peoples dressed and decorated their own wounds, and even their horses wore wounds. So the entire culture saw and honored the wounds that any particular warrior carried. We have to help facilitate the birth of a new self out of the ashes. Soul wounds are healed by initiation. Traditional cultures always knew how to do this. It's not enough to teach a veteran military skills. We are responsible for teaching them spiritual wisdom and philosophy and humanistic studies so that they can carry their experiences and transform them, give them meaning, and more importantly, become initiated people. A soldier is not a warrior, and unfortunately, well, the military is starting to use the word warrior. Walter Reed Army Hospital now uses as its motto, providing the best warrior medicine. And they have there's a Wounded Warrior Project and a Warriors Reintegration Project that Walter Reed is sponsoring. They're well-intentioned by using the word warrior, but they're making a mistake in saying that a warrior is anyone who has experienced war. That's not what a warrior is. A soldier is an uninitiated warrior. We need to initiate our soldiers and our veterans in the spiritual and humanistic and philosophical wisdom to carry the war experience and give it meaning back in civilian society. So initiation heals soul wounds. One man John Fisher, who was at our Chicago conference a few months ago, he went both to Greece and to Vietnam with me. And it was actually in Greece where he had a profound healing of his post-traumatic stress disorder. We did a day-long ritual for him in a warrior's cemetery, and where Pericles gave his speech over the Athenian dead of the Peloponnesian War. And on that site where Pericles spoke, John declared to all of us and to the world, I am no longer a Vietnam veteran. I am a warrior whose service was in Vietnam. He changed his identity on the spot, and John now serves returning veterans with great honor and devotion. And this is a movement we need to help foster in all of our warriors. As a social disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder is a citizen's call to action. There are so many things we can do for our vets. We need to create, tomorrow is Veterans Day. We will tomorrow have a Sunday morning service in honor of Veterans Day and our veterans. We need to create Veterans Liturgy. We need to return the true spiritual meaning of our holidays, Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Not time for sales at the malls, but time for the entire society to become still together and honor the pain and the losses of war and bring our veterans into the center of our community circles. We need to invite veterans into schools, and we need a National Veterans Service Corps. Veterans have skills the rest of us do not and could serve the country, going into inner cities, talking with gangs, going into prisons. They know how to face violence. They're not afraid of it. We need warriors, and veterans have the skills, and we need to reorder our society in a way that makes the veterans' experience meaningful and the veterans' pain surrounded by love and compassion and understanding. And if we reorder our society and reformulate our relations to veterans, post-traumatic stress disorder will evaporate. So healing is possible, and it's both social and spiritual, and I don't have time to share all of the dimensions of the spiritual healing, but I do invite you to think about what we mean by spiritual healing and what the traits of spiritual healing are. Our veterans and our society, all of us, need catharsis and purification. It is not okay to lock the stories and their emotions away. Unfortunately, veterans don't talk. We actually practice the don't ask, don't tell policy with our veterans. Civilians don't ask veterans, what happened? What's causing you so much pain? And veterans don't tell us. They're protecting themselves from overwhelming pain, and they're protecting the rest of us from pain they know we're not ready to hear. So we need catharsis. We need all to open ourselves to stories and expressions of profound pain. We need forgiveness. All over Vietnam, the Vietnamese people, their veterans, their survivors, terribly disabled Agent Orange victims, said to our veterans who were asking for forgiveness, they said, there's no need to ask for forgiveness. We don't blame you. We don't curse you. You were victims of that war just like we were. The only ones we hold responsible are the political leaders who sent you here. Once you were here, you were doing your duty. You were trapped in hell just like us. We're actually brothers and sisters who survived the same hell. So don't seek forgiveness because you aren't to blame. I'm remembering a 17-year-old young woman who's about this big, about waist high, and terribly twisted and disabled from Agent Orange, who took two of our veterans' hands who asked her for forgiveness. And she said these words I just repeated to you. Restoration. We need to practice restoration. We have the famous phrase, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and it has been misused horribly, and the present wars are justified by 9/11. Well, You did this to us. Look what we're going to do to you. Right after 9/11 happened, a veteran I was working with, a Navy Vietnam-era vet, screamed in his therapy session in pain over 9/11. Well, they took out 2 of our buildings. We'll take out 2 of their countries. We didn't know he was a prophet. But that's what has happened, and that's what we do. Instead of an eye for an eye being a call for vengeance, an eye for an eye needs to be a call for restoration. Europe is still grateful to us for the Marshall Plan after World War II. We need to return and restore what we took. So in Vietnam, well, this trip, 2 of our veterans one had been a helicopter door gunner, another had been a helicopter pilot. Both of them had been responsible for slaughtering the Vietnamese water buffalo. Each of them gave a water buffalo back to an impoverished Vietnamese family. We went out into the rice paddies, where Americans haven't been since the war. And each of our veterans gifted a water buffalo. Happily, one of them was pregnant, so they're gifting a herd back. But they gave back some of what they took, and the Vietnamese, again, loved them and thanked them and said, there's no need for you to seek forgiveness from me because I've never blamed you. And they hugged in mutual family. I could tell you many stories of restoration, but the point is, address the wound directly. This is what I took. This is what I need to give back in order to rebalance the cosmic scales and my own soul. We need to practice reintegration. Our veterans and our civilians, as we said, must become one people again, not isolated. The Vietnamese also say there's no difference here between veterans and civilians. We all carry a shared history. We don't make this distinction that you in the West do because we don't isolate our veterans, and war history belongs to all of us. That needs to become true in our society as well. We need to practice rehumanization, and this means that in order to learn to kill and then to serve in war, we have to dehumanize, become dehumanized ourselves, and dehumanize the other. Instead of that, we need to return. We need to help rehumanize our veterans. They're still responding with PTSD. They're responding as if they're in the war zone. We need to help them learn how to rehumanize and regain non-war zone responses. And in that process, we have to rehumanize the other. I don't have time to go into it now, but we can, in fact, understand such terrible things as suicide bombers. We can understand such terrible actions as people wiring their children with bombs from their cultural perspective and not say, they do this, they must be subhuman and they deserve our violence. No. I spoke in Hanoi 2 years ago, and I spoke about my understanding of, from their cultural perspective, of how they could sometimes use their children as weapons. And afterwards, a woman my age came up to me crying and said, how did you know? If an American can understand this wound, then it truly is possible for our 2 people to become one. There's a poem called Song of a Grieving Mother in my book, Golden Tortoise, that I read on that occasion, and we achieved a remarkable cultural and spiritual unity in that moment. We need to practice reconciliation. In Vietnam, I can't tell you the wonderful honor and joy it is to, Bob can tell you, to sit with Viet Cong veterans, American veterans, and Australian veterans, and Canadian, Viet Cong, North Vietnamese Army, Southern Army veterans, all together in one circle saying, we are brothers and sisters who survived the same hell. We are now responsible for each other. And in Vietnam, we can do that. We need to do it, of course, in the Middle East, and we desperately need to do it between the Judeo-Christian and the Muslim worlds, because we are still suffering the wound of the unreconciled brothers. Isaac and Ishmael are still trying to slaughter each other over who gets daddy's land and goods and legacy. And we need reconciliation between those two alienated brothers to the utmost degree. We also need witness. As we said, our veterans are carrying the truth of war. We need to give them every platform possible so that we can hear the stories and restore that truth and give meaning to their service. Our best protection against war and violence is simply witnessing its truth. We need to in creating new identities, we need to find ways that veterans can continue to serve. It would be much better for us to create a Veterans Service Corps and use military experiences and battle mind in service to the troubles in our society than to tell veterans they're disabled and worthless and give them disability payments and ignore them and render their lives meaningless. And we need to provide meaning to the experience. We need to bless the wound rather than hide it. We need to make the wound sacred and public rather than shameful and private. In all this, we need to affirm that war is initiatory, even if it's in its destructive qualities. It transforms people utterly. It causes death and potentially rebirth. We're responsible to foster the rebirth. We can and must support the evolution of a new identity. We can and must accept responsibility for the impact of war on our veterans and on others against whom we have made war. And we can and must recognize and foster and welcome the new self and help that new self serve with honor and meaning. It truly, we know the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. It truly takes a village to bring home a warrior. And we need to reorder our society so that it can become such a warrior welcoming and healing village. And I know my time is up. I'm going to end with one story from this journey to Vietnam. The essence of holistic healing is restoring order to the self so that the self is properly aligned with the cosmos. Ancient medicine, shamanic healing, Eastern medicine all teach us that there is a beautiful cosmic order and that human health is a reflection of that cosmic order, and human distress is disorder in that we have fallen out of alignment with the cosmos. Our veterans with PTSD feel out of alignment with the cosmos, with society, with themselves. And we can, in fact, be put back in realignment. And I just would like to share this image of cosmic realignment from this trip to Vietnam. We went to the Central Highlands where 2 of the 5 veterans on this journey had served. And one of them had been in severe combat in very remote areas of the Central Highlands. He was a radio and telephone operator. He was in severe firefights the 3rd day in country. So he didn't even have time to bond with his brothers, to make friends, to get a name, to enter into a brotherhood that would protect him. And combat was so severe that after just 3 days in country, he swore he would never get close to anybody. He would just try to keep himself isolated and survive. Well, his year of duty was extremely violent, and he said the only people he met who retained any of their humanity were the local Montagnard tribes, not the Viet Cong he was fighting, and not the Americans he was on whose side he was. But he experienced some love and compassion and support from the Montagnards, and they gave him hope that humanity is not destroyed, and I can hold on to some sort of love and connection to get myself through this year. So we went to a Montagnard village, and we stayed overnight there. This was this man's first time back, and we had a friendship ceremony with the Montagnard people. They gave us a concert of their traditional gong music. We gifted their impoverished village with goods, children's clothing and school supplies we had brought from America. Our veteran was wearing a Native American buffalo bone and buffalo tooth necklace. When he saw that of course, the sacred animal to the Montagnard is the water buffalo. So he called forth the village chief and gifted the Montagnard chief with his water buffalo necklace, with his American buffalo necklace. And so the sacred animals of both of our peoples were joined in this ceremony, and they danced together as brothers of the Buffalo clan. Each one of them made a speech initiating the other into his Buffalo clan. This veteran and others were joyous after this ceremony, and it was late at night when the ceremony ended, and the Montagnards put away the rice wine that they had given us, and people drifted off to bed. And 5 of us, 2 veterans and my wife Kate and I and one of our other group member, went for a walk in the jungle. Montagnard people live communally. They have individual homes, but they're all grouped together, and they farm their lands communally. They have communal sacred houses. They invited us to sleep in their communal house, which was a great honor because it's the home of the mountain god. And the mountain god visited some of us in dreams that night. But we went beyond the village and way out into the bush, where they have pepper plantations and tea plantations, and then beyond that is the jungle. And it was full moon night. So we were under the full moon in the bush. And only when we got way out in the bush did I say to our vets, well, how do you feel being back in the bush in Vietnam again? Both of them kind of shook their heads in surprise and amazement and said, I didn't even think about it. We've only been in Vietnam for a week, and my fear is gone. I'm not scared. I'm not terrified. There is no way my last trip here I ever would have been out in the bush alone and under a full moon, because I'd be a target, an easy target. But my fear is gone. And they kind of did a dance under the full moon. And then we looked around, and this is especially what I want to share with you. We can re-enter the cosmic order. These men who had felt so terribly disordered for about 38 years were out in the Vietnamese bush, and the full moon was directly overhead. And underneath the full moon, Orion was lying on his side. And because of its position in that part of the world, Orion wasn't upright or at an angle, but flat on his side, like this, lying on his elbow with, Orion's sword. The constellation is Orion's belt and his sword. Well, the sword was down underneath him, pointing to the ground. And then we looked up the dirt path we had walked through the jungle, and just over the horizon at the head of the path was Mars, the god of war. And I said to our gathering, look where we are. The cosmos is realigned for you. In Vietnam, the moon is a goddess who is a combination in the Western tradition of Artemis and Aphrodite. So she is the moon goddess, and she is a sacred maiden, and she's also the goddess of love and beauty. The goddess of love and beauty was directly overhead, looking over all of us. Beneath her, Orion, the hunter warrior, was lying on his side, and his sword was sheathed. And it was, not only was it sheathed, he was leaning on it. He couldn't even pull it out if he wanted to. He would have to stand up and fight. There's a 13th century Vietnamese Buddhist proverb that says, and I recited it on the spot, "When the war is over and no one dreams of vengeance, what need is there of pulling the sword from its sheath?" So the goddess of love and beauty was looking over us, and the sword was sheathed, and there is no need to pull it out anymore. And on our path, at the head of our path, is the god of war, guiding us down the path, but now subordinate to the sheathed sword and profoundly subordinate to the goddess of love and beauty who is looking over the entire thing. And our veterans and civilians are together in the Vietnamese bush with no fear, no stress, no anxiety, having exchanged love and forgiveness with the Vietnamese people and the Montagnard people, having helped restore by giving water buffaloes and other supplies, having entered the Buffalo clan together, so it's a worldwide clan that includes both of our peoples. And both veterans looked around in absolute amazement and said, "I'm home now, and I see I am indeed a small but significant part of the cosmic order. And it's been restored for me, and I know how I fit and where I belong, and everything inside, body and soul, heart and mind, is shifting back into this order. And now I understand my PTSD. I don't need it anymore. I can go home and carry it as a sacred wound, teach Americans at home that in fact we can be reordered and healed." And they gave great thanks, and we all fell to our knees in thanksgiving and then danced up the path home and, in fact, up the path back toward Mars, following the god of war, but subordinate to the goddess of love and beauty. And that's how they came home, and that's how we all come home, and that's how we can bring all of our veterans home. And it will take us all. So please, if you can, join this effort that we are in together, and in your communities and in your hearts. Under the goddess of love and beauty, let's bring our veterans and loved ones home. Thank you and bless you.